All right, welcome back, everybody, to our first one-on-one fireside chat on Bio on the Bayou. And it's my pleasure to welcome Mark Crowell to his first Bio on the Bayou conference, his first time on a panel here. And Mark, if you don't know, has been a mentor to many in the field, including myself, leading technology transfer and innovation efforts at Duke, NC State, UNC Chapel Hill, the Scripps Research Institute, UVA, KAUST, and he is now the executive entrepreneur in residence at the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. He's also been on the board of directors for Autumn, including serving as president, UIDP, the University Industry Demonstration Partnership, the Research Triangle Partnership, and the Autumn Foundation. We're not done yet. He has chaired the Technology Transfer Committee for Bio and serves as a senior innovation consultant for the World Bank. His consulting includes being a principal with Academy Innovation Advisors, as well as Arkane Innovation, which he founded. This, of course, all started at the age of 2, as he was clearly a child prodigy and is very young. Now I can take a breath. So let's dive in. And we want to encourage you all to ask questions whenever you have them. Don't wait. We will hop around as we need to. If you raise your hand, we'll have Patrick and Elaine watching everything and running a mic out. So, Mark, I wanted to open up because, as I've mentioned, you've been at many institutions in the Chief Innovation Officer role throughout your career, but you were always focused on building an ecosystem as part of your efforts, even before it was cool to do so, and probably before that word was used in the lexicon. But innovation ecosystem is a term we hear quite often now, and I'm curious how you define it.
Thanks, James. It's great to be here. I was hoping that a fireside chat might actually have a fire. It's so cold in here. But
do you want us to get YouTube up? We could get one right here.
But that's the only negative thing I will say about the conference. It's been absolutely fantastic, incredibly impressive, and a whole lot of fun to be here and to connect with so many people, and certainly with James and Patrick and Elaine and others. That's been a delight to be with. So innovation ecosystems, you're right. That term was not really used. In fact, I think the VPRs and presidents that I worked with early on in my career would have looked at me cross-eyed had I said that. But I think the term is actually very apt. Maybe it comes in my own use of the term from my background as my graduate work was in city and regional planning. And so if you interweave that with the work I've done in innovation and technology transfer, I like to call myself an innovation placemaker. So innovation ecosystem is all about making places where innovation can thrive and can succeed. I think it's related to Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village. I've worked in San Diego and RTP and Charlottesville and Saudi Arabia, really different regions in terms of access to capital, access to experienced entrepreneurs. They all had great science. So that's what they share in common with New Orleans and the Gulf region as well. But what they don't always have are some of the other pieces that are critical to ensuring that an early stage innovation asset has a better than average chance to make it through that tortured translational gap. I hate to use the term valley of death, but it's pretty darn spot on. And what do we need to either build, fund, network with, partner with, or somehow get access to in order to address those needs? That's your ecosystem. And I think without it, when I first started this was a very passive sport. When I was at Duke as director, it was basically faculty member throws an invention over the transom, we'd file a patent on it, put it on a list of technologies available for licensing, and pray somebody would come and license it so we could get our patent costs reimbursed. That was it. That was what it is. Now we are really business development people who are key members of an entire ecosystem, whether it's biopharma or otherwise.
All right. Well, speaking of the ecosystem and the fact that you've been in many different kinds, many different types, many different factors, is there a one-size-fits-all formula? What goes into making that strong ecosystem?
Yeah, another great question. And there is not a one-size-fits-all. There are elements that I think have to be put in place. The one thing that they do need to have in common is access to substrate, to brilliant researchers. So the innovation pipeline is the critical asset. The question is, what sort of expertise do you have in your technology transfer office to build value around those assets? If it's a slimly staffed, under-resourced office, what can those people? I've seen 1 or 2 person offices do an incredibly effective job because they know how to partner. They know how to reach out to investment, to alums that might have started companies and might have Rolodexes that could be useful to, if you're in a place like Research Triangle Park, there's a state-funded biotech center which has all kinds of programs we can take advantage of. So what's in your ecosystem? What do you need to do to either supplement it, connect with it, or to start something new? And I hope we can have a chance later, James, to talk about some of the new things I'm seeing, both in areas where I'm working and that I'm seeing others do, to further define and refine the ecosystem.
Absolutely. And as a little segue, you were telling Elaine and I a story earlier about Kaust and something that was different there about the ability to fail. And I wondered if you could talk about that in the quotes that you were telling us about earlier.
Well, so one component of an ecosystem I haven't mentioned is the importance of culture, entrepreneurial and innovation culture. It's when I was in San Diego at Scripps, I think 9 out of 10 faculty had at least 2 startups. One of my favorite stories was early in my time there when a very well-funded entrepreneurial faculty member pulled next to my 20-year-old Saab convertible, which I thought was kind of cool, in his brand new Infinity sports car, $150,000 car. He gets out and he literally, I kid you not, he opened his trunk and placed traffic cones at each corner of his car so that the 20-year-old Saab, wouldn't damage it. So because people there started companies, they failed, they went on and did it again. And I think there was a sense of that was actually a value adding part of the ecosystem that we're here to talk about. In Saudi, the president, the board members, the ministers of investment and education, when I mentioned failure, they all kind of, they just withdrew and became very somber. And so I realized we had some important cultural change to do in order to elevate innovation as a key component of the weave and fabric of the institution. And one of the things I thought of was Beckett, the Irish playwright, had a series of 2-word sentences that spoke to exactly what I'm talking about. And we were allowed, Kaust has stadium-sized screens, video screens in certain parts of campus. And we commandeered the screens for a few days a week with the message that said, I love it. Ever tried, ever failed, doesn't matter. Try again, fail better. And I thought that was just a wonderful way to encapsulate how innovation can become a critical part of frankly, of the academic experience of top faculty who may never have thought it being something that they would get credit for, enjoyment out of, or find beneficial in terms of how it built their programs.
So basically keep trying, just be less bad next time.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of the academy, the role of the academy in these ecosystems, they're usually a key driver. They're usually, maybe they partner with academics, maybe with the government, but they're a key driver in many of these. And how could educational institutions play a more proactive role in developing innovation ecosystems, both in terms of basic and translational research, but also in fostering entrepreneurial mindsets?
Boy, we could spend the whole hour and 45 minutes on that particular subject. So you mentioned some of them. I think what's very popular now, people are talking about it more and more. I'm not convinced it's happening as often as you hear it is happening. And that is finding ways to give credit to faculty and students for trying and maybe failing, but failing better, but for getting involved in the innovation enterprise. So, we're so used to looking at grants, grant dollars, students graduated, all the typical forms of service. I think the universities that are serious about innovation are maybe starting to think about innovation being part of their obligation to provide service. If it's not a 4th leg of the mission, it's at least a key part of the service mission. Another thing is the whole area of metrics, impact assessment, KPIs. I'm sure that every one of you, including my colleague here to my right, who's been involved in this field for a long time, can remember many stories where, the university board or the president says, it's not about the money, James. It's not about the money. We want to give service for the faculty, promote regional economic development. James or I go in and say, here's a proposal to add a staff member so we can expand what we're doing. First question, how much money did you make last year? So it's that disconnect that exists at the even department head, but deans, presidents, love them, don't mean to criticize them. Board chairs, board members, I think have to all buy in to the importance of innovation and innovation impact and value creation in how they perform their obligations to their key stakeholders. Publics get it, and more privates get it. I think actually, I shouldn't even differentiate between the two, because I think most private universities now understand it. Most publics get it. The question is, how do we sort of translate the forgive me, lip service into actionable efforts and strategies on the part of the universities?
So given that you've touched on the role of presidents, trustees, those kinds of things a little bit, are there more thoughts you have on ways they should engage, or on ways we can help them to understand how they can help us more?
Well, here's an anecdote. I was at one university. I won't name the bad one, but I'll name the good one. I was at, with respect to this particular aspect, I was at one university where I was there 8 years and never once made a presentation to the university's board of trustees. I went to UVA, which had announced that they were kind of changing course radically. They were going from what I call the old-fashioned tech transfer 1.0 model to an innovation engine. I was their first chief innovation officer. I went to the board. I was asked to come to the board once a quarter and talk about what we were doing. The president of the university, every time she made a speech, literally one of the critical factors of every single speech in my 5 years there was the innovation program, and how it was not just important for the state, for the university's obligations to the state, but how it was a critical component of the mission. And she talked about Jefferson saying, UVA was founded to make science useful. How better to do that than through this strong innovation program? So it was absolutely marvelous and a great example of how universities can really elevate the conversation.
If we can transition a little bit to corporate connections in this realm, corporate innovation, how can we more effectively engage corporations from the academy? Or I guess a way to rephrase this would be, what are some of the best practices for corporate involvement in ecosystem development as we're helping to drive that from the academic side?
What starts from kind of, in my opinion, from sort of almost a series of trite statements down to some more serious strategic approaches you might think about on the sort of high level issues that are somewhat easy, should be easy to address. In the 30 years I've been doing this, I wish I had $1 for every time a corporate partner has said, "You guys are awful. You're slow." And
that's usually after they've waited for 3 months themselves, because now it's on their schedule.
No, it's part of their culture. It's part of their culture to say we're slow. But in many cases, it was absolutely true. Maybe we weren't slow, but the approval process was slow. So I'm all about reducing transaction friction and focusing on transaction time and bragging about your transaction time and how you want to become a best partner and how deals are done, and making that process as transparent and demystified. Many have told me it's like a black box. They don't understand what we do. So I think if you can demystify it, make it simple, put a standard agreement, a standard term sheet on your website so companies know what they're dealing with, know who has approval authority, make sure that you can communicate to the company that the entity they're dealing with has the authority to do the deal. I've been in many places or heard of many places. I've gone in to do some assessments of programs where the person doing the negotiation it's like buying a car. You go to the sales manager and get them to sign off on it. One of the things, though, and I'll brag about UVA again, because it was an opportunity to kind of perfect this approach. One of the things that I think works very well is really thinking about not as lip service. Industry are your partners, but industry are your colleagues. And the term we use at UVA, and we're using it in the UNC Institute that I'm working in now, is we want to be an authentic partner. And what we mean by that is we're not telling them we have this great program in cancer biology and would like for you to fund it for $100,000 a year and we'll give you first rights. What we're doing is saying we have great cancer biologists who are working in 2 or 3 or 4 clinical areas. How does that match up with your own portfolio or what you're beginning to see in your portfolio? And how can we work together to define a research program which meets the needs of our researchers and the needs of your folks, the folks within your company? So really being much more open to defining the parameters and focus of a collaboration before you start thinking about how much is it going to cost and what will we give you if you provide the money.
Just want to remind you all, about 1/3 of the way through, when you have questions, toss up your hands. Elaine and Patrick will take care of you, and I'll keep rolling forward until you do. Following on the corporate question, so place is really important in this area. And if you're in San Francisco, San Diego, Boston, Chicago, Atlanta, you have huge corporate bases. But for places like New Orleans, the places in the Gulf South, most of the universities that are here, we don't have huge corporate bases where we are. Is there a place, a way for us to engage corporate partners in our ecosystem development, and how would you advise we do so?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I want to talk about RTP. It's where I am now, but Charlottesville was an incredible example of this, where we didn't have any corporate base near Charlottesville, Virginia, in Central Virginia, but we had some amazing corporate partnerships and won a number of competitive RFPs, if you will, to become a key a key academic partner for several major corporations. For example, AstraZeneca put out an RFP to 5 major health centers, including us. We were the smallest in the cardiovascular research space. We were the smallest of the schools they asked to respond. But when they came, we had the VP for research, the tech transfer people, the head of the cardiovascular research center. We told them that they could embed their scientists in our cardiovascular research center. We told them they could send their scientists to see us in the winter. We would send our grad students to Sweden to their facilities in the summer. They had first rights on the research. If they didn't elect to license, then we would work together to find funding, and potentially they could co-invest in a startup company we might create. So they kept coming back and asking, could they invest more money and define more areas in which they'd like for that money to go. So I don't think you have to be Boston or RTP or San Francisco to build those kinds of relationships. I looked around this conference and I looked around a breakfast meeting this morning. You're on the radar. I mean, you've got some pretty significant partners sitting around the table who are, it's just an incredibly impressive array of folks who know you're here and who know what you're doing. So I think you're exhibit A for why you don't have to be one of the so-called, major tech centers in order to be successful doing it.
Well, it's always fun. I would say people always ask us how we get those people here. And it's like, we ask.
Yeah.
Like you meet them and you ask. And
Yeah.
people, and I think we're fortunate because as a place, New Orleans is somewhere people want to come.
Yeah.
But also, we try and treat people well when they're here, which makes a big difference.
Well, I'm going to, at the risk of, being sorry I did it, I'm going to compliment James one more time.
Wait, what? Is this being recorded?
But one of the things you have to do, and this guy's really good at it, your team is really good at it, is you have to get in the game. And I've seen how these people, how James and team work bio. I mean, the partnering system at bio is an absolutely exhausting process. Usually when I go to bio, I have to come home and go to bed for a couple of days because you're literally going at it 12 to 15 hours a day. And then you go into their receptions and all of this kind of stuff. But what does that lead to? It leads to, again, the kind of success that you see with the array of companies, investors, and potential partners that are here in this room. So it doesn't happen overnight, and you can't just do it by, again, creating a website with partnering opportunities at Tulane or partnering opportunities at LSU. You have to get out and meet the people and form the relationships.
That's that contact sport. And speaking of contact sport and getting out there, I'd like to move to global perspectives now for a little bit. And you mentioned RTP, which is Research Triangle Park. But now I want to talk about global issues, including the RTTP, which is formerly stood for Registered Tech Transfer Professional. Now it's just RTTP because tech transfer is a term that is still used, but also a little different in ways. And that's a global, for those of you who don't know, it's a global certification that you have reached a certain level of stature in the field. How many people here have their RTTP? I want to ask. 3 of us. So if you don't, and you're in the innovation field and you want something recognized globally, talk to Patrick, Mark, or myself. Mark and I think have both been involved in the board of ATTP. I chaired it, so I'm like legally obligated to pitch it everywhere I go now. And now I've done my job.
I hope he declared his conflict of interest.
But I wondered if you could share some examples of successful ecosystems you've seen around the globe that have particularly impressed you, and what lessons we can draw from them. Because I know in your consulting role, you are drawn upon to advise people everywhere. And can you give us some thoughts and examples of things we might learn from?
Yeah, so I think great question. And again, a little quick context. As I mentioned, as James mentioned in his intro, I've worked in the Middle East at KAUST in Saudi Arabia. I've consulted in Saudi and Dubai, done a lot of work with the World Bank, mostly in Eastern Europe, a little bit in India. And then I've worked in a prior life at UNC a lot in Southeast Asia, Singapore. So what are some great ecosystems that are worth emulating, studying, and trying to understand? Well, Singapore, front and center. I mean, it's I see a lot of heads nodding. If you haven't been to Biopolis and you're in the biopharma space, whoa. I mean, it's every major pharma company has a presence there. The energy, the ebb and flow of innovation, of ideation, of things moving and shaking. How did they do it? I mean, I'm not an authority on it, but way before I got involved with Biopolis, I know they were bringing in people, top scientists from the UK and from the US to kind of take in residence positions for part of the year. They weren't giving up their. I know someone at UC San Diego who was the dean of the med school who went there as a 2-month-a-year professor in residence and helped build one of their biomedical research programs. So building that capacity, the government deciding this is a priority. That we talked earlier about resources, resourcing the effort, and all of a sudden you've got this amazing success story that's really one generation old. But that's kind of going to be hard to replicate too many times. So I've worked a lot in Serbia. I know right now Serbia is building a life science research park in Belgrade, and they're working with the World Bank to develop the strategy, to develop the industrial recruitment process. And again, it's a big vision. It's a big ticket item. Do they have the staying power? I don't know. I can't tell you it's going to be like Biopolis, but that's their vision. And they've got this wonderful female prime minister who's been on every phone call talking about innovation and how important it is to the country. So it gets back to leadership. And she personally anchored a delegation that went to study Biopolis and came to the US as well. And when she asked, I was helping them develop their agenda. And she knew more than I did when I was saying, well, you should go see so-and-so. And she'd say, they left 3 months ago. Who else could we see? I mean, she knew what she was doing.
Well, and moving on, if we can, to what we call tech transfer innovation offices inside academic centers. They play a critical role in every ecosystem, often, serving as the crux or the hub in the middle of the wheel. But what are the challenges and opportunities you see for those groups and ways they could potentially enhance their effectiveness as they contribute to developing the ecosystem?
Well, so in my opinion,
another hour, I know.
Again, as someone with an RTTP credential, it's not going to surprise you to hear me say that I think the tech transfer office should be the nucleus, the front and center, the ground zero for innovation. If it's not, my initial inclination is to say what's wrong or there's some dysfunction somewhere. And I think the universities that develop innovation initiatives or processes that include an end run around that office are avoiding a problem somewhere. I don't know where it is, but they have to be, because why? They actually have the transactional authority. At the end of the day, tech transfer means somebody signs a deal, and usually it's the tech transfer office. It should be, in my opinion. But what can they do? First of all, they need to advocate for their innovation agenda, their resource needs, and understand the key priorities that the university, the board, the president, the deans, and others have for the program, and manage that process accordingly. And realize that even if I've heard, other than, I heard our mutual colleague at MIT, Lita Nelson, one time say that MIT marketing consists of answering the phone. Okay, you got it. You got it.
Well, they're MIT. It's easy. Yeah.
I know we have an MIT grad here, or probably more than one. Or Stanford's is probably about as well situated. But most of us have to most tech transfer offices need to be front and center in exhibiting the kind of energy, outreach, and partnering mindset that are critical to building up the ecosystem in a way that helps deals go through. It's being realistic and working with your researchers about what success looks like and what it takes to get there, and understanding how far you could go and being honest with them about their baby. Some babies are not real attractive. So if you're if you're a service organization, you probably have to work on everything that comes across your desk. If you're all about creating businesses, jobs, programs, products, partnerships, research collaborations, and you're spending time on inventions, when I fully retire, I'm going to write a book about the 10.
So that's going to be in 50 years. You failed retirement how many times now?
About the 10 lamest inventions. And I'm already seeing 8 of them. I've got to come up. Still got 2 slots. I think we have to figure out what our strategy is and make sure that we're aligning our resources and our strategy accordingly. I think more and more offices are wanting to be the generator of economic impact and value creation, whether that's a major licensing deal with big pharma or whether it's a startup attracting venture funds, maybe early on angel capital and growing to. But if that's your priority, you need to manage the workload, I think, accordingly.
And in managing that workload, a lot of our workload is on building bridges. And so we have, key tenets of academia, industry, government we talk about. We also have investors, we have foundations, we have institutes, things like that now. How do you build those bridges to develop optimal ecosystems, especially when everyone's not beholden to the same organization? You're all separate. You all have different goals that can align in many ways. And I guess a better way to phrase the question, or what are some of the key strategies you found most effective in doing so?
Well, and I think you have to do this both within and outside of the institution. So I didn't really flesh out fully the answer to your last questions, but I think it's relevant to this question as well. So I think, as I mentioned, I think the tech transfer office is ground zero, but guess what? The ecosystem starts elsewhere within the university as well. So we have an innovation center in our business school, and we have an innovation institute in our school of pharmacy, it's interesting. I used to be the central tech transfer guy at UNC and might have been a little bit resentful of this Institute for Innovation that I'm now working with that has $100 million from a donor. It's like, what are they doing messing with our innovation? But somehow you've got to overcome the tendency to be concerned about turf. That's why the presidential and board leadership is a critical component of making all these pieces work together. Beyond that, and again, you guys are doing it. You're sharing resources and ideas and things like this conference. You're reaching out to other institutions in your city, in your region. I love the concept of this third coast and how the institutions are coming together.
The best coast.
Pardon me?
The best coast.
The best coast. Excuse me. Pardon me. My wife's from New Orleans, so I can.
I was saying he's gonna get in trouble, and I'll text her.
Yeah, so I'll go along with that. But to find like-minded partners, and at the end of the day, I've found this to be a business that competition is pretty easily managed if you articulate what your goals are and understand where there are synergies and aligned interests. I used to think, oh my God, we've just recruited in a new venture capital firm. Is the old firm we've been working with going to be ticked off? They loved it because they wanted to share diligence, to share deals that made their money go faster. So I think finding ways to understand that this is not a zero-sum game.
Well, I think there's plenty of work for everybody. It's what we talk about all the time. And if people are doing a function, work together. It's kind of incredible. And that's the great thing we have at Tulane is, Kimberly and her team and I, we work really well together and we're able to divide out and conquer and not duplicate resources. It's phenomenal. So speaking of resources, funding, startups, investment dollars. We had a great panel on investment in dollars this morning. How can our ecosystems facilitate access to capital for early stage ventures, especially in regions like ours that don't have investment firms?
That's no excuse. Find it. Charlottesville had no institutional venture capital within 85 miles. We had a family office or two, and we had some well-to-do alums. We were near enough to Washington and to RTP to reach out, and we began to attract their interest, again, because we were creating assets that had been substantially de-risked and made ready for the marketplace. I was hoping I could make this announcement super specifically today, but a teaser. We're on the verge of launching a major new investment fund at the Eshelman Institute for Innovation at UNC. I just got the email today that investors are in, papers are being drawn. We're going to be signing in a week or so. But the point is, even in an area like RTP, where you think we have lots of venture hanging around off the trees, we don't. And so we've gone and found, in this case, we found an investment banking fund out of New York, which has two principals from the state of North Carolina. And we began pulling on their heartstrings and making courting them in a proper way and inviting them to basketball games and things like that. And it looks like they're going to put up a fund, but they're making us work with our brethren down the road at Duke and our brethren down the road at NC State. So, I think there are ways that you can create momentum, common vision, and catalyze those types of parties to come together and create a fund that will, you don't just want the, it's got to be both sizable enough to stay in deals a while, but understanding where university deals tend to be. And that to me is the biggest challenge. The risk of early stage deals is something that's just critical, I think, to have assets to it. I mean, that's what we're all missing, whether you're, even if you're in Stanford, I've heard them say they don't have enough of that kind of capital.
Right.
So we got to find it. We've got to find it. We got to put it together. We got to make it happen.
Next, moving on to kind of a more personal story between us. Like, I started in this field in 1999, so I just want to point out it's our anniversary next year, and I'd like a present. 25 years. But I don't think I've ever asked you this, and you're one of the OG tech transfer people. And how did you get in the field, and why do you stay in the field?
I told him
He warned me.
I'd kick his, if he asked me that, because for those of you who didn't get it, OG means old guard.
I meant original guard, not old guard.
Thank you. When I got into this in 1987 as director of technology transfer at Duke, this was a brand new office, a brand new field. I mean, when they advertised for that job, I actually applied because I wanted to learn about the field of technology transfer and intellectual property commercialization. I had a background in city and regional planning, as I mentioned, and I've been working in the UNC Medical School, kind of independently developing a program that's maybe a very early, cranky, dysfunctional version of what you're doing. Doing
you just call me old and cranky.
doing industry partnering. So nobody was doing industry partnering, but by Dole, I mean, some of the things in the environment made it possible to do that. So I was sort of self-teaching. I applied for the job at Duke and was amazed beyond belief when I got it. So that's really how I got it. It was I've told many people in total honesty, if that guy walked in my office in the last 3 universities where I was with the same resume I had in 1987, I would not have hired them. So the field is evolving, is very sophisticated. Usually people who are coming in the field usually PhDs, have got a master's and some significant financial training and background or business development training, et cetera. Why have I stayed in it? It's just too much fun. When you get the occasional, not just the big, I did a big company. We did a big company at Scripps that had a huge payday. For example, Receptos. We've seen a couple others. The company out of UNC, Ask Bio, one of the big gene therapy companies that had a major exit a few years ago that made me feel pretty good. But one of the coolest days in my career was when I got a call from the head of our neurocancer program at Duke. So this was early in my career, who said he had an antibody of some type that was for some very rare brain tumor. And there was a kid in Scotland who had 24 hours to live. Could I help him interface with the FDA to get a compassionate plea release arranged? And then could we charter the airplane to fly to Scotland? And we actually, when I drove him to the airport and we went right through the security gates up to the plane and the ice chest goes on the plane, I thought, this is a pretty cool career. Yeah. So yeah, that's why I stay in it. Right now, that's nice. I'll tell you one more feel-good story. But again, this is not the old model of tech transfer. At the Eshelman Institute, we just launched we did a spin out that's a nonprofit called READY, the Rapidly Emerging Antiviral Drug Development Initiative. And READY's goal is to leverage, I didn't know this until the pandemic. UNC has the biggest virology program in the country. We have 40 labs in virology. And we created this institute called READY that has, think about this, the goal is in 5 years, raise 500 million to $1 billion to create at least 5 broad spectrum antiviral therapeutics ready, phase 1 approved, ready for the next pandemic. So we've got to raise $500 million to $1 billion for a drug development program when there's no market until there is one, and figuring out how to build that program and how to convince the university to let us spin it out as a nonprofit, because we're going to need to partner promiscuously to bring in compounds and capabilities from all around the world, foundations, other universities, companies, et cetera. And there's no way we had a consulting group do the study, that our partnership strategy would have been severely limited if it was a UNC initiative. Yep. But by spinning it out as a separate 501c3 with its own board and fundraising strategy, we hope it will and I think we all do, that it will be successful in achieving that goal. So that's what tech transfer these days is all about, is building those kinds of.
Well, then the last question I want to ask you, and I want to push the audience to ask questions in our last little bit after this, is on how we measure success in metrics. What are the metrics that you think are most important, given all you've talked about, for us to be looking at measuring?
I love metrics that focus. I don't think there's a one size fits all, but I love metrics that deal with faculty and student engagement and participation, particularly repeat customers, or faculty engagement and student engagement in entrepreneurship, innovation, business development courses, or programs of various types. I'm basically all about figuring out ways to measure value creation. So if you're working in the biopharma world, it's going to be 10 years before you're going to have the traditional metrics, the royalties or stock that can be liquidated and that sort of thing. But, we track all of our startup companies' portfolios. So as they go through the approval process from phase 1 to phase 2, for example, they use that when they develop their valuation for further rounds of funding. So we're following those valuations and essentially reflecting that in our reporting structure to indicate that our portfolio, while not necessarily liquid, is increasing in value every time one of these types of things happens. We look a lot at both company. Well, it used to be that we did company formations. Now, however, with some of the programs that exist for the government, sometimes you see companies being formed when they're really not a company. So we're looking to see companies that have raised at least one round of institutional financing. We are tracking headcount in terms of employment among those companies. We're looking at how much funding they're bringing in from outside investors beyond whatever we help them raise through our angel networks and the seed funds that we have access to. What am I missing?
I think the only thing is that people move to the metrics you set for them. So what you said is important. If we set X startups, you can create them, but as you kind of alluded to, they may not be worth the paper they're incorporated on.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more evidence that some of our companies they get acquired and maybe or get a funding round where the investors ask them to go elsewhere. And yet some regions hate that. Some states are developing programs where if there's state innovation funding and they leave the state, they have to pay it back or there's a penalty. I don't think you should do that. I think usually that means a serious value inflection point. And furthermore, if you're doing things right, a pretty sizable chunk of the workforce of those companies are going to stay behind and become the serial entrepreneurs that you can go to do follow-on companies. So we're trying to find ways to track that because it's happening in RTP more and more, and I suspect it is here or will be here.
All right, we have about 5 minutes with Mark, and I can tell you his wife has summoned him back to family time. So if you have questions, ask him now. He won't be around much longer this afternoon. Fire away. Yeah. We got one in the middle here.
Guys, thanks. Something that as a finance person, non-scientist, I'm in a family office. We got into venture through a federal program, and now we're in it, right? So one of the things, and I see Adega, I saw Dino back there, something that we learned in 1820 under an EDA study was that service provider capacity from prototyping, like what Adega's group does, to regulatory work like Dino's group does, and our firm stood up a management consulting practice because at least, North Louisiana, which is where our office is in Bossier, and our secondary office over the road, the intellectual property lawyers, CPAs, securities professionals, etc., are especially when you get down to Louisiana New Products Development Team, prototyping capabilities. So we're really, really thin in service provider resources, right? So, I never studied ecosystem development, risk management, and marketing degrees, adoption curve, and business law. But when we started doing military work, we started to understand this notion of just like companies travel with adoption curve, there is a specific capacity or minimal capacity needed in service providers. And so amongst our peers in family office that are dabbling in venture, we're seeing it as middle America starts to get deeper into venture. an understanding of how to position service providers to help the companies, faculty members that are doing spin outs is a substantial challenge. So I was wondering, any efforts at your organizations, did either one of your boards have any efforts related to service provider engagement? And then what if any trends do you guys see in this? Because it's kind of the last leg of the innovation ecosystem that is necessary to create translation. So hopefully it's also our question. Great event, excellent panel, but really interested in your guys'.
So let me quickly summarize so we have it for video. Basically, to boil it down, the crux of the question is how do we better engage the service providers and help create them that are crucial for an ecosystem?
So a couple of ideas I have. I'm seeing this problem not so much at RTP, thank God. I did 20 years ago. But I'm seeing this in several regions that are developing innovation districts around campuses that have strong science and a big interest in doing this well, but don't have that kind of capability that you're mentioning. I mean, I'm seeing some of the research parks or innovation innovation district buildings that are coming up are including, they're actually giving discounts to patent attorneys and business development experts of various types that are willing to come and kind of create a presence there, even if it's not 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. One other thought that just left my train of thought just that fast. I love the office hours idea that these guys had, that you find ways. It's all about engagement. Where I am now, we have a CRO industry, just outside the back door, and so we don't have to worry about that. Other regions where I'm working don't have access to that, and so partnering with other universities that do, we generated a couple of very interesting collaborations. I think, to be honest, were driven more than anything else by the fact that our PIs at UNC or Duke had access to CRO expertise to step in when that became necessary.
And I'll tell you, just from the Tulane side and the School of Medicine side especially, we talk to anyone, any company, any kind. When Elaine and I are out at Bio or Biotech Showcase, about whatever with bio in it that we're at, or Alexis when he fully joins the team in December, we meet with service providers constantly because our goal is to have them be able to refer them to Kimberly and her team when they're investing in the gap fund internally to move things forward. Do they need those pieces just to get that information? So I say connect with us. That is our goal, absolutely, is to know everything in this space can be useful. And I'll tell you, quite honestly, some of the interest we've gotten in licensing deals is from referrals from service providers who knew that we engaged with them, we cared about their business, so they refer people to us. So it's crucial, I think, to ecosystem development.
There's a number of service providers here, and I would encourage you guys to try to partner with them because the pharmacokinetic studies and the boring studies that make a drug work aren't the ones that your professors are going to want to do. And we have outsourced things to service providers so they could get that done.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. One more question.
James, hi Mark. Thank you all so much. Mandy Decker with States and Harbison. My day job.
Service provider and sponsor.
my day job is being a patent attorney, but right now I'm also the inaugural chair of one of these new state IP associations. And these state IP associations are under the US IPA, and they all have a mission involving 3 pillars. And it's IP education and awareness, it's diversity and inclusion, and it's ecosystem collaboration. And so I wanted to ask, from your perspective, both of you, are there typically components of the ecosystem with a view towards IP in particular that are overlooked that the state organizations should make sure to reach out to and bring into the fold? Thank you.
Well, I think based on the 3 you mentioned, I can't say this is one that's, you mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion, and obviously it's not overlooked, but I think it often is. It's often not enough front and center and such initiatives. I think furthermore, I mean, one of the things we're doing a lot of is we're forging relationships with, in our case, some HBCUs in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia to really add diversity to the clinical trial networks that we can engage as some of our products get closer and closer to the clinic. There's some wonderful programs designed to focus on women and other underrepresented groups, not just women, but underrepresented groups writ large in IP and in venture developments of great programs through the Kauffman Foundation, for example. So those are I hope that's responsive. I'm not sure I can think of anything else right off the top of my head.
And with that, I noticed you didn't say Xavier University of Louisiana and your HBCUs, and they're right here. And with that, I'd like to hand it to you to give any closing thoughts you have before we transition to our next presentation.
Well, it's very nice. Very nice for the moderator to do that. Thank you, James. It's thought I was done here. This has been great. I have really enjoyed the time I have spent here. I'll be back next year if I possibly can, and if I'm invited. Although I'm told I can't speak again.
Elaine might make an exception for you. I don't know. Oh, yes.
But I think the sort of thing, the thought I will leave you with is this partnering promiscuously concept. It's a absolutely fail-safe way to overcome any obstacles or deficits you think your region or ecosystem may have. We did a study one time. When I was president of Autumn, I traveled the world as Autumn president. I spoke about, they didn't want to hear about Autumn. They wanted to hear about RTP everywhere I went. How did RTP happen? And if you look at RTP, two things I'll share with you that I think help create the kind of success that it's generated. One is what the state had amazing foresight, dumb luck, to put the land in a foundation. The sale of land the funds were put into that foundation to be spent only on programs that all three of the universities in RTP agreed to participate in. Talk about incentivizing cooperation. But then, but that's maybe a silly example, but pretty profound in a way. But fast forward, we did a study when I was in the tech transfer office at UNC, looking at were we partnering closely enough and collaborating closely enough, and we found that a significant portion, almost 50% of our NIH grants at UNC and at Duke and at NC State, reference a co-investigator, a cooperating PI, some scientist collaborator from one of the other institutions in the research triangle. So I think building that kind of culture of collaboration and partnering, you got it, in spades, is going to only pay great dividends. And then bringing people together like this conference and other things that you do are just going to be the icing on the cake. So kudos to you, and thanks for having me.
Mark, thanks so much for making time for us. We appreciate it.